بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي رب زدني علما سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. Dear brothers and sisters who are tuning in, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan bikum. How are you guys doing? I hope you're all well. And welcome to this second part of our ongoing series entitled The History of the Compilation of the Quran with your brother in Islam, Sadiq. Jazakumullahu khairan. May Allah reward you all highly for taking your time out to join me. May Allah make these episodes beneficial for all of us. So in the second episode, we're going to be looking at the next phase of compilation, which took place during the time of Abu Bakr. May Allah be pleased with him. We mentioned in the previous episode that the Prophet ﷺ himself compiled the Quran during his lifetime, in the sense that he indicated the positions of verses. So the Prophet was the first to compile the Quran, and his compilation was in the sense that he indicated the positions of verses, some of which may have been written on separate items with one scribe, or even amongst several scribes. We're now going to see that Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, is the first person to actually arrange the Quran's compilation into a single book. So we're going to look at, we're going to consider why and how Abu Bakr carried out his compilation, his methodology. And then we're also going to take a brief look at what role Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, played in the spread and dissemination of the Quran after the demise of Abu Bakr. May Allah be pleased with all of them. So before we carry on, just a quick recap of what we covered in the previous episode. We're not going to go over everything because we covered quite a lot. But the most important points were that, number one, we mentioned the Quran was written in two distinct periods. The Meccan period, i.e. before migration, prior to migration, and the Medinan period, which was post-migration, up to the demise of the Prophet ﷺ. And we also mentioned the key differences between the two periods. We mentioned also that the primary means of preservation of the Quran during the lifetime of the Prophet was through memory, and I've also written is through memory, because as some of you may know, even today when copies of the Quran are printed, they're actually sent to Huffaz, they're actually sent to people who have memorized the Quran off by heart, and whose job it is to check these copies. They are sent out to them who check and validate the copies for any mistakes or inconsistencies before they're even allowed to enter circulation. So even today, the primary means of preservation of the Quran is actually through memory, i.e. the memories of those who have memorized the Quran off by heart. And then the Prophet ﷺ leaves this world on the 13th of Rabi' al-Awwal, 11 years after the Hijrah, corresponding approximately to the 8th of June 636. And when he passes away, the Quran is written completely, but separated across several companions. And we mentioned the details of that in our first episode as well. So Abu Bakr becomes the Khalifa by general consensus. I'm of course leaving all the details about how he was actually elected. And the first thing that Abu Bakr has to deal with after he becomes Khalifa, the first thing that he has to deal with is widespread dissension and rebellion, wholesale apostasy that flares up across the peninsula. You see, before the Prophet left this world, pretty much the entire peninsula, pretty much the entire Arabian Peninsula had converted to Islam and pledged to the Prophet, effectively recognizing Medina as the head of state, as the seat of authority. They agreed to pay the zakah, the annual zakah, and send that to Medina for distribution to the poor, which for all intents and purposes, from their perspective, they saw as a tax. Those that didn't accept Islam, those tribes that chose not to accept Islam, were simply made to pay a different tax known as the jizya, in exchange for which they were guaranteed protection from Medina. The problem was that a lot of these tribes who accepted these conditions did so grudgingly, because for many of them, this was a completely new idea, this idea of a nation state. Remember, the Arabs were largely a nomadic people. We mentioned in the first episode, the Arabs were largely a nomadic people, a tribalistic people, loyal only to their tribes. Now they're being asked to unite with all the tribes of the peninsula, some of whom they may have ongoing feuds with, and recognize Medina as the head of state. So this was a completely new concept for them, and they saw it as an affront to their freedom, as an affront to their honor. Especially the payment of jizya or zakah. This payment was completely new to them. They had never in their lives actually paid taxes to anyone, let alone a higher authority. So now when the Prophet passes away, they use this opportunity to break their bay'ah, to break their oath of allegiance and declare secession. And their excuse was, well, our oath was with Muhammad and it was a political oath. Now that he has passed away, now that he's left this world, that oath is null and void. Therefore, we need to sit down and negotiate a new agreement. And of course, Abu Bakr wasn't accepting any of that. You also had other tribes who were willing to recognize this new khilafah, who were willing to recognize this new system of governance, who were willing to recognize Abu Bakr as the Khalifa, but they tried to negotiate with him by saying, we'll recognize you as the Khalifa, but we do not want to continue paying the zakah or jizya. And Abu Bakr wasn't having any of that either. And then more alarmingly, you also had a handful of false prophets who popped up across the peninsula in different regions, seeing the Prophet's success, seeing how he managed to mobilize hundreds and thousands of people from different tribes under his rule. Remember, this was unprecedented. No one in the recent history or even total history of Arabia had ever managed such a feat of uniting the entire peninsula under their authority. So they became greedy and jealous, and they saw this, the passing of the Prophet, as an opportunity to usurp his legacy for their own benefit. So Abu Bakr set about to deal with these rebellions, and the wars that were initiated as a result of these rebellions are collectively known in the books of history as the Ridda Wars, or the Apostasy Wars, which lasted around a year and a half. So for example, you have this man called Tulayha ibn Khuwaylid, who claimed prophethood almost immediately after the Prophet passed away. Tulayha actually became a Muslim just before the Prophet had passed away, and had actually performed Hajj with the Prophet. So he would have seen so many people, hundreds and thousands of people performing Hajj with the Prophet. And during the final sermon, he would have seen so many people, those same people, quietly listening to the Prophet and heeding his advice and listening to his commands. So he became crazed and thinks, I want a part of this success. So when he returned to his tribe, after he returned to his tribe and the news reached him that the Prophet had passed away, he claimed prophethood, and he claimed that the Prophet, before passing away, had conferred a part of his prophethood to him. So Tulayha claims prophethood, and his tribe, the Banu Asad, overwhelmingly support him and accept him as a prophet. The Banu Tay as well, they were allies of the Banu Asad, so they also accepted Tulayha. And then you also had members of the Banu Ghatfan, the Hawazin. All of these tribes joined together under Tulayha's flag, and they march to this spring called Buzakha with 15,000 men, where they encamp with the intention of attacking Medina. So Abu Bakr starts off by sending Khalid ibn al-Walid with an army to Buzakha, and the battle takes place here, which Tulayha loses. And after being defeated, he flees with his wife to Syria, where he stays for the rest of his life. And most reports indicate that he actually returned to Islam. Then you have this man called Malik ibn Nuwayra. Now, Malik didn't claim prophethood, but his rebellion was one of the most prominent ones, which is why I'm quickly mentioning it here. Malik ibn Nuwayra was one of the leaders whom the Prophet had appointed as a leader with 4 others over his tribe, the Banu Tamim. So Malik ibn Nuwayra, along with 4 others from his tribe, were appointed by the Prophet as leaders over the Banu Tamim, and it was their responsibility to collect zakah, annual zakah, from the Banu Tamim and send it to Medina for distribution. Now, after the Prophet passes away, he refuses. He and the 4 others that the Prophet had appointed, they refuse to continue payment of zakah. They rebel against Medina. So now the Banu Tamim split. One half supports Malik, the other half remain loyal Muslims and remain loyal to Medina. So Malik decides to attack the other half of his tribe who remain loyal to Medina. And as he's about to do so, a lady called Sajah with her army passed by, and she comes from this region called Yamama. So she's passing by with her army on her way to attack Medina, because she also, who was a Christian, had claimed prophethood after the Prophet had passed away. So when she's passing by the Banu Tamim, she sends a message of friendship to Malik, which Malik accepts. And Malik then instigates Sajah to attack the Banu Tamim who remain loyal to Medina. So Sajah attacks the Banu Tamim, and after attacking them, she continues on her way to attack Medina. However, on the way, at a place called Nabaj, just over here, she encounters another group of Muslims from the Banu Tamim who had escaped from the battle. So she ends up in another battle with the Banu Tamim, and they capture some of her soldiers. So they negotiate with her. They say, let's hand our prisoners over to each other unharmed, but on top of that, you have to abandon attacking Medina. So she accepts and takes her soldiers and returns to Yamama, where she came from. And after returning to Yamama, she links up with another man called Musaylama, whom we're going to encounter in a couple of slides' time. Now, Malik himself, he encamps at this place called Battah. So he encamps here with his side of the Banu Tamim who remain loyal to him. So Khalid, after he's dealt with Tulayha, travels on to meet Malik ibn Nuwayra at Battah, and a battle ensues, after which Khalid executes Malik. Now, admittedly, this piece of history is highly controversial because some of the narrations mention that the adhan had actually been called out in the camp of Malik ibn Nuwayra, but despite that, Khalid went forward and executed him. And his excuse was, well, Malik simply ordered the adhan to be called because he was afraid of either being killed or captured. So the matter is taken to Abu Bakr in Medina, and Abu Bakr judges that Khalid was clearly mistaken because a very similar incident had happened during the lifetime of the Prophet. So Abu Bakr paid blood money to Malik's heirs. The other controversial incident was that Khalid actually married Malik's widow almost immediately after he had executed him. So that's the other controversial historical event, but we don't have time to go into that. That's part of another topic. And then you had this guy called Aswad al-Anasi. Aswad al-Anasi, who actually claimed prophethood about 4 months before the Prophet passed away. So Aswad al-Anasi was from the Anas tribe, hence his name al-Anasi. And he claimed prophethood, like I mentioned, 4 months before the Prophet passed away. And he seized control of Najran, which was this province just north of Yemen, and Sana'a, which of course was and still is the capital of Yemen. So he seized control of these two provinces and claimed prophethood. And many people with weak faith gathered under his flag. So a huge number of people from Yemen accepted him as a prophet and gathered under his flag. So the Prophet ﷺ sent a message to Abu Musa Ash'ari and Mu'adh ibn Jabal. If you remember from the first episode, we mentioned that the Prophet had sent Abu Musa Ash'ari and Mu'adh ibn Jabal to Yemen to teach the people of Yemen Islam and the Quran, and to guide them, in other words. So they were stationed in Yemen. So the Prophet sent word to them and to a Persian army that was stationed in Yemen who had accepted Islam, to deal with Aswad al-Anasi. Now Aswad, who was living in Sana'a, had forcibly married the widow of the former governor of Sana'a, whose name was Shahr. And Shahr was the son of Ba'dhan, whom the Prophet had appointed as the governor of Yemen. So the Prophet had appointed Ba'dhan as the governor of Yemen. Ba'dhan passed away and he left Shahr as the governor. And Aswad al-Anasi attacked Sana'a, killed Shahr and forcibly married his widow and claimed his prophethood. So, of course, Shahr's wife, whom he had married, hated him. Sorry about this. Hated him. So she assisted two leaders of the Persian army that was stationed in Yemen, whose names were Fayruz and Dadwiya, to enter Aswad's home at night and execute him, which they did. So Abu Musa Ash'ari and Mu'adh ibn Jabal send news of his execution to Medina, but by the time the news reached Medina, in the morning, the Prophet had already passed away the night before. So after the Prophet passes away, this man called Qais ibn Abdi Yaghuth, along with another man called Amr ibn Ma'di Karab Zubayri, who were loyal to Aswad al-Anasi, they regroup Aswad's supporters and recapture Sana'a. Okay, so Abu Bakr in Medina sends an army under Muhajir ibn Abi Umayyah, who links up with Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, whom Abu Bakr had initially sent on another mission, and they both attack Yemen, attack Sana'a, and capture Qais and his crony Amr ibn Ma'di Karab, and they send them to Medina to face Abu Bakr. So when they reached Medina, the narrations mentioned that they asked for forgiveness and returned to Islam. And so Najran and Yemen, by and large, return back into the fold of Islam. Then you have this man called Laqit ibn Malik, who claimed prophethood in Oman. So he claimed prophethood in Oman, and the vast majority of the people of Oman and the vast majority of the people of Mahra, this province here just south of Oman, accept his prophethood and gather under his flag. And they also forced out the zakah collectors whom the Prophet had sent to this region. So Abu Bakr sent an army under Hudayfa ibn Mihsan al-Himyari, Ikrimah and Arjafa, these three commanders, with an army to confront him in Oman. And a major battle takes place with Laqit and his army, which resulted in Laqit being defeated and Oman returning to Islam. And then in Mahra, here you had some former soldiers of Laqit who had escaped and settled here and turned the people apostate. So Ikrimah carried on after defeating Laqit ibn Malik. He carried on to Mahra with an army and defeated the remaining rebels here, and that caused the population of Mahra to again return to Islam. This was one of the major rebellions as well, led by a man called Hatem ibn Dubay'ah in Bahrain. So in Bahrain, you had two large tribes called the Banu Abdul Qais and Banu Bakr ibn Wa'il. They had accepted Islam just before the Prophet had passed away. As soon as the Prophet passes away, they renounce Islam with the excuse that if Muhammad had been a prophet, he wouldn't have passed away. So that was their excuse. So you had a companion called Jarud ibn al-Mu'alla, who was from the Banu Abdul Qais. He was living in Medina at this time. So he sought permission from Abu Bakr to go to his tribe, the Banu Abdul Qais, and try to advise them to return to Islam. So Abu Bakr accepts. So Jarud ibn al-Mu'alla travels across the peninsula to Bahrain and advises the Banu Abdul Qais, and they eventually return to Islam. However, the other large tribe, which we mentioned, the Banu Bakr ibn Wa'il, they chose not to return to Islam, and they installed Hatim ibn Dubay'a as their leader, and they encamped somewhere here to face the army that Abu Bakr sent. So Abu Bakr sent an army under Ala ibn al-Hadrami, who actually engaged in a battle with Hatim ibn Dubay'a and eventually defeated them. And that meant that Bahrain again returned to Islam. So in total, there were around 12 to 13 rebellions. I haven't mentioned every single one of them for the sake of brevity. So Abu Bakr sent a total of 11 armies against each rebellion. Just a side point here, I mean, you can imagine how difficult, what kind of a precarious situation this is for Abu Bakr, because you see the Prophet has passed away, and the unity that the Prophet had achieved, the unity that the Prophet had strived so hard for, is almost on the verge of splintering if Abu Bakr doesn't take action. And he deals with these rebellions showing strong leadership. You see many of the companions, including Umar, by the way, who's normally seen as the more stern and strict companion, felt uneasy about taking military action against these rebellions. But Abu Bakr didn't waver or falter. He showed strong leadership and took decisive military action against each and every one of them. But the most significant battle by far, and the one most relevant to our discussion, was the Battle of Yamama, which was waged against this criminal, Musaylama al-Kadhdhab, or Musaylama the liar. This man, Musaylama, was so shameless that he claimed prophethood during the lifetime of the Prophet, and he tried to negotiate with the Prophet, even when the Prophet was alive. So in the Prophet's lifetime, he came with his tribe, the Banu Hanifa, to Medina to accept Islam at the hands of the Prophet. And he said to the Prophet, I'll accept Islam on the condition that you make me your Khalifa after you. And the Prophet at that time happened to be holding a twig in his hand, and he said, even if you asked me for this twig in exchange for your Islam, I would not give it, because it seems you are the same liar about whom I've been informed in a dream, referring to a dream that the Prophet had seen several nights before, which Imam Muslim describes in detail in his Sahih, where the Prophet ﷺ said that he saw himself in this dream with two bangles on his hands. And he was greatly worried by the presence of these two bangles, because of course the Prophet disliked pomp and grandeur. So in the dream he was told to blow them away, which he did, and the bangles flew away. So when he was describing this dream to the companions, he said, I interpret this to mean that there are going to be two false prophets immediately after me, one of which of course was Musaylama. So when the Prophet gave this response to Musaylama, that I would not give you this twig in exchange for your Islam, Musaylama returned to Al-Yamama, which is where he lived with his tribe, despondent. And after the news reached him that the Prophet was in his final days, was about to pass away, he sent a letter to the Prophet saying, from Musaylama, the messenger of Allah, to Muhammad, the messenger of Allah, peace be upon you, I have been made a partner to you in Nubuwwah, in prophethood. Therefore, half the world belongs to me and half the world belongs to you. But I have no hope of justice from you. This is what he wrote to the Prophet. And the Prophet wrote back, أما بعد سلام على من اتبع الهدى فإن الأرض لله يورثها من يشاء من عباده والعاقبة للمتقين. that Salamun ala man ittaba al-huda, peace be upon the one who follows the guidance, follows true guidance. فَإِنَّ الْأَرْضَ لِلَّهِ, verily the earth belongs to Allah. يُورِثُهَا مَن يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ, He bequeaths it to whomever He wills. وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, and a good end will be for those people who have taqwa. In other words, because Musaylama said to the Prophet, half the world is mine, half the world is yours, the Prophet in response is saying, the world doesn't belong to either of us, it belongs to Allah, and He bequeaths it to whomever He decides. So anyway, this happened during the lifetime of the Prophet. Now, after the Prophet's demise, thousands and thousands of people across this eastern region accept Musaylama as a prophet and unite under his flag. He managed to convince such a large number of people. So Abu Bakr initially sent Ikrimah, but after he was unsuccessful, he redirected Ikrimah to Mahra, which we mentioned. He went to Oman and then he went to Mahra. And instead, Abu Bakr sent Khalid ibn al-Walid with 13,000 men to confront Musaylama. And Khalid ibn al-Walid engaged in a battle with Musaylama on the plains of Al-Yamama, the Battle of Yamama, in approximately, I mean, there is difference of opinion, but most historians say that it took place in December 632. And Musaylama was ultimately defeated and executed. Okay, he was actually executed. He was actually killed by Wahshi, who was a companion who killed the uncle of the Prophet, Hamza, during the Battle of Uhud. Wahshi wasn't a Muslim then, and he killed Hamza, who was the uncle of the Prophet. So by killing Musaylama, it's almost as if he was absolving himself of that mistake. This, I just decided to put these pictures here. If you actually go to Saudi Arabia and you go to the plains of Al-Yamama, you have about 29 different graveyards where the martyrs of Al-Yamama are buried. So approximately 1,200 Muslims were killed in this battle. There are conflicting opinions. Some say 1,400. Some say, sorry, not. Some say 400. Sorry. Some say 800, and other narrations say 1,000. But the most accurate opinion is 1,200. The important thing is, or one interesting thing that you'll notice here, is that if you look at where these rebellions took place, you'll notice an interesting pattern, and that is that the further you move away from Medina, the more prominent the rebellions become, the more numerous the rebellions become. So at the time of the Prophet, this central region of Arabia was split into Oman here, Yemen here, and this central region was split between Hijaz, which was this western region here that housed Mecca, Medina, and many other cities, and this eastern region here was known as Najd, and it remained like this until 100 years ago when it was united under Saudi Arabia. But up until 100 years ago, it was split between these two regions, Hijaz and Najd. So what you'll notice is that the vast majority of tribes in and around the Hijaz, most of them remained loyal to Islam. Most of them remained loyal to Islam. And the simple reason for that was because they had been blessed with the company of the Prophet. Most of them had probably met the Prophet in person. And the Muslim community in this region was properly established. So naturally, their faith was much stronger than these tribes here, away from Hijaz into the Najd region and Yemen and Oman, most of whom had probably never even seen the Prophet, never spoke to the Prophet, and were recent converts to Islam. So naturally, their faith wasn't as strong as the people of Hijaz. And from the martyrs of Al-Yamama, you had 70 Qurra. Qurra meaning companions who had memorized the entire Quran off by heart. 70 of them are martyred. Some narrations mention 700. Other narrations mention 500. So this was a huge loss for the Ummah, because remember we mentioned that the primary means of preservation of the Quran was through the memory of the companions who had memorized it. So such a huge loss was a huge problem. And one of the martyrs of Al-Yamama was also Salim. Salim, the freed slave of Abu Hudhayfa. If you remember back to our first episode, we mentioned that there were 4 companions regarding whom the Prophet said, learn the Quran from them because they were the most knowledgeable about the Quran. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Ubay ibn Ka'b, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, and the 4th one was Salim, the freed slave of Abu Hudhayfa. So he was also martyred in this battle, as were also Thabit ibn Qais. Also, we mentioned that he was one of the scribes of the Prophet in Medina. Ibn Shammas, another companion who was known for his memorization of the Quran. So, in other words, you had a huge loss of companions in this battle who had memorized the Quran off by heart. So, when the news reached Medina, Umar was the first one who apologies, who received the news that so many Qurra had been martyred. So he went to Abu Bakr and advised him that, look, 70 of our Qurra have been killed, and we're only going to lose more in the upcoming battles. So we need to compile the Quran into a book form. And Abu Bakr initially is quite reluctant, but after much persuasion, he agrees and calls Zayd ibn Thabit and explains the situation to Zayd. And Zayd ibn Thabit also, just like Abu Bakr, is quite reluctant at first. Now, Zayd ibn Thabit, if you remember, again, he was the main scribe of the Prophet. He was presented to the Prophet when the Prophet entered Medina when he was only 11 years old, and went on to become the main scribe of the Prophet because he lived the closest to the Prophet's mosque. So the full narration is here. I'm not going to go through the entire narration because it's quite long, but I just summarized it for you. But to summarize it again, Zayd is mentioning this. He says that Abu Bakr sent someone to call me, and I came into his presence, and Abu Bakr said to me that Umar said to him, that many people from the battle of Imamah had been killed, many of whom had memorized the Quran, and he advised me to compile the Quran into a book form. Initially, I was reluctant, but I now agree to it. What do you think? So Zayd ibn Thabit says that I said, how can you do something that the Prophet himself didn't do? And after much persuasion, Zayd also accepted. Why were they so wary and reluctant to carry out this task? The reason why was because the Quran talks about and chastises the previous nations, the people of the book, for distorting and corrupting their books. So that's why they felt very uneasy initially of carrying out this task, especially because of the fact that the Prophet himself hadn't carried this task out. But they eventually came to the conclusion that this was in the best interests of the Ummah. And so Zayd starts this momentous task of compiling the Quran. So Abu Bakr, he issues an edict across Medina for the companions to bring forth written documents of the Quran. So if you remember from the first episode, we mentioned that the companions had various verses of the Quran written on different media. So Abu Bakr orders the companions to bring those forward to the mosque. And Umar and Bilal ibn Rabah paced the streets of Medina, according to the narrations, announcing this edict so that everyone knew about it. So how did Abu Bakr actually go about, or how did Zayd go about compiling the verses under the instruction of Abu Bakr? So what were Abu Bakr's orders? This narration says, Abu Bakr said to Umar and Zayd, sit at the entrance of the mosque, and whoever comes to you with a written verse along with 2 witnesses, then record it. So from this simple sentence, we notice 2 conditions that Abu Bakr placed on Zaid. Number 1, condition 1, it had to be written. And number 2, the companion bringing forth the written verse had to also have 2 witnesses that the verse that they were bringing forth, the document that they were bringing forth, had been written in the presence of the Prophet. This is the most important part here. So 2 witnesses that that document had actually been written in the presence of the Prophet. You see, during the time of the Prophet, we mentioned that he had scribes whom he would call, and they would write the verses in his presence. So those written verses are considered primary copies. However, there would have been other companions who would have copied verses from those primary copies. So in effect, those copies are secondary copies. And then you would have had more companions still who would have copied from these secondary copies, and so their copies would be tertiary, and so on. Because remember, Medina at the time of the Prophet had a huge literacy rate. Most people could write, and those that couldn't would have simply asked someone to write for them so that they would have a written copy of certain verses. So Zaid here didn't just accept that it was in written form. They had to have been written in the presence of the Prophet, i.e. they had to be primary copies. Okay, he did not accept secondary or tertiary copies. And on top of that, there had to be 2 witnesses that it indeed was a primary copy. And then what Zayd would do is that if he was faced with multiple written sources, multiple written documents of the same verse, he would cross-verify them. But remember, it wasn't a condition to have multiple copies. We're going to come on to this in the next few slides. So many companions would have brought forth documents which recorded the same verse. And so what Zayd would have done is he would have cross-verified those documents and looked for any mistakes or inconsistencies between the verses, between the documents, before writing it down. Somebody might ask, where did this idea of 2 witnesses come from? It actually comes from a verse in the Quran, verse 282 of Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah talks about the laws of transactions and lending money. And one of the injunctions in this long verse, which happens to be the longest ayah of the Quran, Allah says, وَاسْتَشْهِدُوا شَهِيدَيْنِ مِنْ رِجَالِكُمْ. Call upon 2 of your men as witnesses when you're lending money to someone. Now, someone might ask, hang on, if memory and oral recitation was the primary mode of preservation, as we mentioned, then what was the need of bringing written verses and providing witnesses? Why not just ask Zayd and so many other companions, Abu Bakr himself, who had memorized the Quran from A to Z? Why not just suffice on their memory? Why not just use their memory to write the Quran down from cover to cover? Or to put it the other way, if written recordings were the condition, then does that mean that the memory of the companions was effectively obsolete, that they weren't using their memory at all, as in it didn't play any role? And the answer is no. You see, whilst they provided witnesses, Zayd also verified it against the memory of the companions who brought them, and against his own memories, and against his own memory, and more than likely against the memory of companions who would have known the entire Quran by heart as well, like Ali and Ubay ibn Ka'ab. So the written verses weren't the end all be all, right? After they bought the written verses, he would cross-check it, not just with multiple written documents of the same verse, but also with his own memory and the memory of the companion bringing it forth, and the memories of others who were known to have memorized the Quran from cover to cover, like Ali, Ubay ibn Ka'ab, etc. The other point someone might ask is, if the entire Quran was written, as we mentioned, some of the companions, including Zayd himself, already had the Quran in written form with them from cover to cover. So what was the point of bringing all of these other companions into the process? What was the need of going through this toiling task of collating random pieces when all they could have done is recall a companion who had it all written in his possession, like Zayd himself, like Ali, like Mu'adh, like Ubay ibn Ka'b? Why didn't they just do that? And the answer is that in this way, everyone participated in the process of compilation. It became a community effort. So no one could express any concern regarding the verses collected, nor could anyone complain that the verses were gathered from only a select few individuals. So that was the wisdom behind that. Now, this is where we have to pause. This slide is very interesting, and this is something that throws a lot of people off. Okay, so he says, this is, of course, part of a very long narration from Zayd ibn Thabit of how he compiled the Quran, but I'm separating it across different slides. So you mentioned as part of that narration, حتى وجدت آخر سورة التوبة مع أبي خزيمة الأنصاري ولم أجدها مع أحد غيره لقد جاءكم رسول من أنفسكم عزيز عليه ما عنتم حتى خاتم براءة till I found the last verse of Surah At-Tawbah with Abu Khuzaym al-Ansari, and I did not find it with anybody else other than him. And I've interpolated here, I did not find it, i.e. in written form, with anybody other than him. And that verse is لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ, the last two verses of Surah At-Tawbah. So we have to pause here. What's Zayd saying here? Zayd is saying that when he was collecting the written copies of each verse, when he came to the last verses of Surah Bara'ah, he found that it was only written with Abu Khuzaymah. Okay? Abu Khuzaymah has two witnesses, that's not a problem. He has two witnesses. But he happens to be the only one who has it written and no one else. Okay? Is that a problem? No, it wasn't a problem, because Abu Khuzaymah had it in written form and he had two witnesses. So for Zayd, this fulfilled both conditions that Abu Bakr imposed. It's just that no one else had it written at that time. If you go back to that slide that we, this slide over here. So the first condition was it had to be in a written form. The second condition, that there had to be two witnesses that the verse or verses had been written in the presence of the Prophet. That's it. Those were the two conditions. And then what would happen is multiple companions would come with the same written verse. And so what Zayd would do is that he would cross-verify them, but that wasn't a condition. It wasn't a condition that there had to be multiple copies of the same verse. That was just something that Zayd did of his own accord when he was faced with several copies of the same verse. And so what Zayd is saying is that with every verse, what happened was that many companions came with the same written verse, but incidentally, with the last two verses of Surah 9, only Abu Khuzaymah had it written. He's just stating that as a matter of incidence, not that this was a problem. Okay. Now, Orientalists and polemicists always bring up this narration to try and cast doubts. They say, okay, fine, we accept that the conditions of Abu Bakr were met, fine, but the fact that it was in a written form with only Abu Khuzaymah, that means that no one knew of these verses until Abu Khuzaymah actually brought it forward. So they try to basically paint the impression that these were two random verses that no one knew of. Therefore, Abu Khuzaymah, or anyone for that matter, could have concocted those verses. So they try to paint the impression that these verses were completely unheard of until Abu Khuzaymah actually came forward with them. Now, with everything we've said so far, it's pretty obvious that this is incorrect and quite ignorant, because if we look very carefully at what Zayd said, when Zayd says, I did not find the verses with anybody other than him, listen to this carefully, I did not find the verses with anyone other than him. That indicates that he was actively searching for a written document of the verse until he found it with Abu Khuzaymah. The fact that he was actively searching for it means that he, along with many other companions who were acting as assistants to Zayd, they knew these verses, they were aware of these verses, but they couldn't actually include it in the master copy until they had a written document of it. You see, so it wasn't enough that Zayd and other companions knew these verses off by heart. Abu Bakr's orders were, it has to be in a written form. I don't care if you know them off by heart, and I don't care how many of you know them off by heart, I want them in a written form. And Ibn Hajar actually encapsulates this in his book. So he mentions Abu Bakr, فَلَمْ يَأْمُرْ أَبُو بَكْرٍ إِلَّا بِكِتَابَةِ مَا كَانَ مَوْجُودًا. Abu Bakr had not authorized him to write except that which was in written form. وَلِذَلِكَ تَوَقَّفَ عَنْ كِتَابَةِ الْآيَةِ مِنْ آخِرِ سُورَةِ بَرَاءَةِ. Therefore, he refrained from including the last verses of Surah Bara'ah حَتَّى وَجَدَهَا مَكْتُوبَةً, until he actually found it in written form. مع أنه كان يستحضرها هو ومن معه, despite the fact that he, as well as those who were with him, could remember it perfectly well from memory. You see, so the fact that he was actively searching for these verses means that this idea that no one knew of these verses is completely unfounded. In the next episode, when we talk about the compilation of Uthman, this will make even more sense, because during the compilation of Uthman, a similar incident happened. A verse from Surah Ahzab was found written with only one companion. And in that narration, Zayd explicitly says, I searched for that verse until I found it with such and such. So that shows that Zayd was, in fact, some scholars like Ibn Kathir mention that that incident, which people assert happened during Uthman's compilation, actually happened during Abu Bakr's compilation, and he's quite adamant about that. In either case, it's clear that Zayd actively sought out the verses, and the fact that he actively sought them out shows that the idea that these were verses that were random and only known to Abu Khuzaymah is completely unfounded. What we also understand as an extrapolated point, and this is very subtle, it's very easy to miss. What we infer from here is that for every verse that was included, the companions' memory of those verses, most importantly Zayd's, because he's the one compiling, their memory wasn't made obsolete in the process. They weren't using the written documents at the expense of what they knew by heart. It was the other way around. So Zayd was primarily utilizing his memory of the verses and then actively searching for those verses in written form as a condition for inclusion. So he was matching the written verses to his memory, not the other way around. Okay? The other interesting thing is the fact that it was only with Abu Khuzaymah at this time doesn't mean that it wasn't written at all with anyone else, because remember we said many companions like Zayd, Ali, Ubay ibn Ka'b, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, they had the entire Quran written from cover to cover. Okay, but their written compilations were not deemed sufficient by Abu Bakr. Okay, so the fact that it was only with Abu Khuzaymah at this time doesn't mean that it wasn't written at all with anyone else. It's just that during that specific time period, during that specific incident, no one had it written except for him. The other interesting thing is that Ibn Hajar transmits a narration from Ibn Abi Dawud, which he mentions in Fath al-Bari, that another companion called Harith ibn Khuzaymah actually came forward with a written document of the same verses. So now someone might say, okay, so what did Zayd mean then when he said, I did not find it except with Abu Khuzaymah? What we say is that what he meant is initially I did not find it with anyone apart from Abu Khuzaymah. So if we go back to the beginning, what happened was Zayd is looking for these verses. he finds it with Abu Khuzaymah, he writes it down in the master copy, and after already writing it down in the master copy, Harith ibn Khuzaymah comes forward with a written document of the same verses. So when Zayd says, I did not find it with anyone, what he means is, I did not find it initially with anyone apart from Abu Khuzaymah. And the other thing, you see, the polemicists like to say, again, that same objection, the fact that only Abu Khuzaymah had it written means no one else knew of these verses. When Zayd said, I did not find it with anyone, what he means is, I did not find it written with anyone. Zayd is referring specifically to the written form, i.e. only Abu Khuzaymah had it in written form. That doesn't negate that several companions knew the verses by memory. That does not negate that. And we know, again, as we keep repeating, Zayd and Ali and Ubay ibn Ka'b, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, and dozens of other companions knew the Quran from A to Z, so they knew of these verses. It's just that it was only in written form. It was in written form with only Abu Khuzaymah at this particular instance. And there's actually a rebuttal to the idea that these verses could have been made up. It's illogical because the verse does not contain anything that has anything to do with beliefs or laws of any kind. Okay, so it doesn't praise any particular tribe. It doesn't forbid or permit anything. It does not contain anything that isn't found in any other verse in the Quran. So there doesn't seem to be any apparent conceivable benefit from fabricating these verses. Okay, so what does the verse say? لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ. There has certainly come to you a messenger from amongst yourselves. عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ. Grievous to him is what you suffer. حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ. He is concerned over you. بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. And to the believers, he is kind and merciful. فَإِن تَوَلَّوْا. But if they turn away, فَقُلْ حَسْبِيَ اللَّهُ. Then say, Allah is sufficient for me. لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُ. There is no God but He. عَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلْتُ. On Him is my trust. وَهُوَ رَبُّ الْعَرْشِ الْعَظِيمِ. And He is the Lord of the Supreme Throne. So the verse doesn't really talk about anything to do with praising a particular tribe or permitting or forbidding anything, or anything to do with beliefs or anything that's not found in any other part of the Quran. So there appears no benefit to concocting these verses. I hope that makes sense to you guys. The orthography of Zayd's written compilation. So whilst Zayd was writing these verses, how did he actually write them? What were the orthographic conventions that he adopted? Because just like in English, for example, we have British English, American English, where words are spelled differently. So how did Zayd actually write it? Well, he most likely would have adopted the script of Medina because he was a native of Medina. He was born and brought up in Medina. So most likely he would have adopted the Medinan script. We don't know for sure because we don't have Abu Bakr's compilation with us. As we're going to mention later, it was destroyed 50 years later by Marwan ibn al-Hakam, the fourth Umayyad Caliph. So he most likely would have adopted the script of Medina. After he's finished compiling the Quran into parchments, that written compilation becomes known as the Suhuf in Arabic, which is the plural of Sahifa, which means parchment. And it was named as such because it was written on multiple parchments of varying size before it was actually bound together into a single book. And those suhuf are then placed in the archives of Medina under the care of Abu Bakr until he passes away. So the key word here is suhuf, and that's different to mushaf, which refers to the compilation of Uthman. So that's an important distinction to note, although it's not a strict binary distinction. The terms are frequently actually used interchangeably, but more often than not, when we say suhuf, we're referring to the compilation of Abu Bakr, and when we say mushaf, that refers to the compilation of Uthman. So we're coming close to the departure of Abu Bakr. Let's quickly, briefly consider how the empire expanded during his rule. So after Abu Bakr had dealt with the rebellions and reunited the peninsula under Medina, he didn't stop there. He decided that it was time to take on these two great superpowers, the Sasanians and the Byzantines or the Romans. This wasn't just an offensive move, by the way. So when he decided to declare war on these two empires, it wasn't just an offensive move, it was also defensive. Because even during the lifetime of the Prophet, these empires showed signs of wanting to inflict harm on the Muslims when they realized that Islam was growing into a formidable force. So when the Prophet sent the Persian Emperor Khosrow a letter peacefully inviting him to Islam in the 6th year of the Hijrah, he tore it to pieces and he told his governor in Yemen, Badhan. So if you remember, we mentioned a couple of slides ago, Badhan accepted Islam at the hands of the Prophet. But before he accepted Islam, in the 6th year of the Hijrah, when the Prophet sent a letter to Khosrow inviting him to Islam, he tore the letter. He sent a message to Badhan, who was his governor in Yemen, to capture the Prophet in Medina. So Badhan actually sent two men to Medina to capture the Prophet. And when they reached Medina, the Prophet said, go back to where you came from, because your king who has sent you has died. So they returned to Yemen, and they actually found out that the Emperor Khosrow II had actually passed away. From the Byzantine side, they would constantly attack and loot Muslim caravans and traders passing through and into Syria, especially through their proxy tribe, the Ghassanids. So if you remember again from the first episode, we mentioned that the Ghassanids were an Arab tribe who are Christians, and they formed their own mini kingdom called the Ghassanid kingdom between the peninsula and the Byzantines, and they were loyal to the Byzantines. So when the Muslims would pass through their territory, they would constantly attack, harass, and loot them. Then matters came to a head when the Prophet sent his companion Harith ibn Umayr, may Allah be pleased with him, to Shurahbil ibn Amr Ghassani. Shurahbil ibn Amr Ghassani was the Ghassanid prince. He was the king of Busra, which is today in southern Syria. It's literally a border town between Syria and Jordan. So the Prophet sent his companion Harith to him to invite him to Islam, and Shurahbil executed him, killed him. And when the news reached the Prophet, this was particularly hurtful for him, because killing messengers was, and still is, of course, a war crime. Even in ancient times, this was obvious. It was a declaration of war to kill a messenger. So the Prophet sent 2,000 Muslims under Zayd ibn Haritha, Ja'far, and Abdullah ibn Rawaha to avenge Harith. And a battle with the Romans, the first battle with the Romans, took place in a village called, or near a village called Mu'ta, a village which is in modern-day Jordan, the famous Battle of Mu'ta. And this happened in the 8th year of the Hijrah against 200,000 Romans, a battle which the Muslims were victorious. And in the following year after that victory, the leader of Busra again prepared to attack Medina. So when the Prophet received intelligence that they were advancing into the peninsula, he set out with 30,000 companions until he reached Tabuk, just north of Medina. And when he reached that place, he received news that the enemy had retreated. So he returned to Medina. That's known in the Seerah as the Battle of Tabuk, even though no battle actually took place. So it was abundantly obvious that these empires were never going to leave them alone. So Abu Bakr decided to take the first move. So as soon as he has dealt with the rebellions and united the peninsula under Medina, he started off with the Persians. He ordered Khalid, after Yamama, he ordered Khalid to move northeast and initiate the wars with the Sasanians or the Persians. We're not going to cover the entire history of the wars. That will take much too long, but I'm just going to mention just out of interest, some of the prominent battles that took place. So these 4 battles took place in quick succession, the first 4 consecutive battles. So the Battle of Kazima, otherwise known as the Battle of Chains, Ma'arikat al-Salasil, so called because the Persians' feet were chained together as a sign that they were ready to die rather than flee from the battlefield in case of defeat. So this was where the Muslims faced a Persian army under the famous Persian commander Hormuz. Khalid himself challenged Hormuz to a duel in this battle, in which Khalid actually defeated Hormuz and killed him. Straight after that battle, you had the Battle of Thani, which took place near modern-day Basra, where they faced another famous Persian commander called Qarin. The Battle of Al-Walaja, and then the Battle of Ulais, otherwise known as the Battle of the Rivers of Blood. It became known to historians because the river Khasif, next to which the battle was fought, turned red from the blood of the huge number of Persian casualties. So these were 4 consecutive battles that took place in 633, the first 4 battles against the Persian Empire. And then you had the conquest of Al-Hira. Hira was Abu Bakr's main target from the beginning. It was a fortress city, and it was the Persians' kind of administrative capital in southeast Iraq, and it was actually the base of the Arab tribes that were loyal to the Persians, the Lakhmids, I should be saying. So remember we mentioned that the Ghassanids had their own kingdom here, and they were loyal to the Byzantines. The Lakhmids were another Arab tribe over here who were loyal to the Sasanians, who were loyal to the Persians, and they were formed just over here, northeast of the peninsula. They had their own kingdom there, and their capital was Hira. So the conquest of Hira took place immediately after these 4 battles. And then you had this famous battle, the Battle of Firad. The Battle of Firad in January 634, just on the border, the edge of the border between the Persian and Byzantine empires. So this was actually the first battle where the Persians and the Byzantines joined together. They allied with each other against the Muslims. It was on the border. So you had Persian and Byzantine garrisons on either side. So when Khalid advanced to attack the Persians, the Byzantines and numerous Christian tribes on the border decided to ally and assist the Persians because they saw the Muslims as a common enemy. There were several other battles against the Persians, like the conquest of Anbar, Ain al-Tamr, Qarin, but these are the main ones, and I've skipped most of the detail for obvious reasons. On the Western Front, you had the Battle of Yarmouk, the famous Battle of Yarmouk. So to face the Romans, Abu Bakr sent 4 armies to start the incursions into Byzantine territory. So he sent Abu Ubaidah with an army to Homs, Amr ibn al-As to Palestine, Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan to Damascus, and Shurahbil ibn Hasana to Jordan. And eventually, so remember Khalid was stationed here on the Persian front. So eventually Abu Bakr ordered Khalid to leave the Iraq expeditions and head west to join this western frontier and take command of these 4 armies who had decided to join together as one unit. So he did. Khalid left the eastern front and moved over west, and he left Muthanna ibn Haritha Shaybani in charge of the eastern front and in charge of Hira. So when he reached the western front, the first battle, the famous battle that took place, the only battle against the Romans that happened during Abu Bakr's rule, was fought in Yarmouk, which is on the Syrian-Jordanian border today. And the Muslims, again, by the will of Allah, were victorious. This battle was decisive because it paved the way for Muslim conquests further into the Levant, for further into Greater Syria. And it was during this battle that actually a letter arrived from Medina to Khalid, informing him that Abu Bakr had passed away. And that letter also informed Khalid that Umar was the new Khalifa, and Umar had dismissed Khalid as the commander-in-chief and replaced him with Abu Ubaidah. So when Khalid read this letter, he went to Abu Ubaidah and informed him, saying, I'm now under your command. He didn't make a general announcement to prevent any kind of ill feeling and disappointment spreading amongst the Muslims, because Khalid by now had become a superhero. The Muslims considered Khalid the best commander, because I mean he won pretty much every battle on the Eastern Front, so he had basically gained fame and glory. So Khalid went to Abu Ubaidah and quietly said to Abu Ubaidah that I'm now under your command. And someone said to Khalid that you don't seem bothered by the fact that Umar dismissed you. And Khalid said, I was fighting for Allah, not for Umar. So this was the famous Battle of Yarmouk. So Abu Bakr passes away on the 7th or the 23rd. There are differences in the historical dates, but he passes away on the 7th of Jumad al-Ukhra. Sorry, I missed the M here. It should be Jumad al-Ukhra, in the 13th year of the Hijrah. He passed away after suffering from a fever that lasted 15 days. And when he passes away, he selects Umar as his successor. And the Suhuf, which we mentioned, they remain in the state archives and passed into the care of Umar. May Allah be pleased with him. So as a summary, what was the incentive of Abu Bakr's compilation? What caused him? We mentioned that it was due to the heavy losses of Qurra, companions who had memorized the Quran during the Battle of Yamama, and it was only expected that more companions who had memorized the Quran would be martyred in upcoming battles. Therefore, there was a need to compile the Quran, a unified compilation necessary. What was the objective? The objective was to collate all the scattered pieces into a single book. But this is the most important point. It was not to standardize the script, nor to issue official copies. So Abu Bakr's only objective was to collate all the scattered documents of the Quran into a single book. He did not do anything to standardize the script, and he didn't issue his own official copies for people to use. So all the written documents that the companions brought forth to Zaid, they were returned to them, and as a consequence, unofficial copies of the Quran would have continued to be produced and circulated. And that wasn't a problem. That wasn't seen as a problem, because that wasn't the objective. Okay, so Abu Bakr passes away and Umar becomes the Khalifa. So now we're going to look at what role Umar played in disseminating the Quran. So during Umar's time, as soon as he becomes the Khalifa, he continued the wars that Abu Bakr initiated, and the empire carried on expanding. So during Umar's rule, Islam literally exploded across the Middle East and beyond. In fact, just as a side point, Michael Hart, some of you might know him, the famous American astrophysicist and author of the famous book, The 100 Most Influential People in History. He ranks the 100 most influential people in history, and he ranks the Prophet in first place, interestingly, and he lists his reasons for that. And in 52nd place, he ranks Umar. And he writes, one of the reasons he writes in that book is because if it wasn't for Umar, he writes in this book, if it wasn't for Umar, it's doubtful whether Islam would be nearly as widespread as it actually is today. Because there was never a time in the history of Islam where the Islamic Empire spread as rapidly as it did during the time of Umar. So on the Western Front, the entirety of Syria, Palestine, Egypt, all of these regions were wrested from the Byzantines by 641, about 6 years into his rule. I mean, this, if you look here, it says additions during the Patriarchal Caliphate. So this actually shows the empire at the end of Uthman's rule. But at the end of Uthman's rule, it wasn't very different from Umar's. The only difference is, for example, here, Islam spread into Egypt, and this is modern-day Libya. So Islam didn't spread into Libya during the time of Umar. It was actually during the time of Uthman. Here as well, you can see that the empire has gone all the way up to modern-day Azerbaijan and Armenia. It didn't reach that far during the time of Umar. That was during the time of Uthman. But the vast majority of this orange color shows how the empire expanded during Umar's rule. On the Persian front, the conquest of Persia was fully completed in 642. The Persian Empire was actually his top priority. When Abu Bakr passed away, if you remember, we mentioned that when Khalid left the Eastern Front and went over to the West, he left Muthanna ibn Haritha in charge of Hira, in charge of the Eastern Front against the Persians. So whilst Muthanna ibn Haritha was stationed there, he received intelligence that the Persians were regrouping for another assault. So Muthanna ibn Haritha actually traveled by himself to Medina to ask for reinforcements from Abu Bakr. So when he came, Abu Bakr was already on his deathbed. And so Abu Bakr, one of the parting advices that he gave to Umar on his deathbed, he said, when I pass away, the first thing I want you to do is to send an army to help Muthanna on the Persian front. And I want you to finish the conquest of Iraq. So Umar, as soon as he becomes the Khalifa, he sent an army under Abu Ubaid al-Thaqafi to assist Muthanna on the Persian front. And after a series of many battles, the conquest of Iraq was fully complete after the famous Battle of Qadisiyah in 636, just 2 years into Umar's rule. That battle lasted 3 days and 3 nights. After Qadisiyah, after the famous Battle of Qadisiyah, Iraq had been totally conquered. The conquest of Iraq was complete. And after that, they continued to advance eastwards until they captured Ctesiphon, which was the main capital of Persia. By the beginning of the following year, in 637, they captured Ctesiphon, or in the Arabic books, it's referred to as Madain. But Western historians, they refer to it as Ctesiphon. And the last stand against the Persians took place in 642, the famous Battle of Nahavand. Nahavand is a place in modern-day Western Iran, and that resulted in a total defeat of the Persians. That was basically the end of the Persian Empire, the end of the Sasanian Empire. It totally collapsed and never recovered after that. Historians and that's the reason why historians such as Imam al-Tabari, they refer to this battle as the Battle of Nahavand. They refer to it as Fath al-Futuh, the victory of victories, because this marked the beginning of the end of this decade-long war with the Sasanians and basically opened up the entire Iranian plateau to the Muslims. So Iraq, we mentioned, was totally conquered by 636. Sistan or Sijistan or Sakistan in ancient terms is this lower eastern part of Iran that borders Pakistan and the lower southwestern border of Afghanistan. This area here is known as Sijistan. Today it's known as, I think, Sistan Balochistan province. It makes up one of Iran's 31 provinces. So that was conquered by Umar. Here on Greater Khorasan, which is basically modern-day Afghanistan and northeast Iran. Transoxiana, in Arabic, it's referred to as Ma Wara al-Nahr, the land behind the river. So you have this river called the Oxus River that runs literally alongside the borders of modern day Afghanistan and Turkmenistan. And whatever is immediately behind it is known as Transoxiana or Mawara al-Nahr. So basically, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, southwestern Kazakhstan, all of these lands came into Islam. So that was on the Persian front. On the Byzantine front, we already mentioned the Battle of Yarmouk, the 3-day war, which started during Abu Bakr's life, just before he passed away, and continued by Umar. After Yarmouk, a series of battles followed that led to city after city in Syria to fall like dominoes. And Syria was fully completed. Syria was fully conquered by 637, the same year that they captured Ctesiphon. Okay, so they fully completed the conquest of Syria. By Syria, of course, we mean modern day Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. Palestine fell in late 637 to Amr ibn al-As, Abu Ubaidah and Khalid ibn al-Walid. So Amr ibn al-As, Abu Ubaidah and Khalid ibn al-Walid together conquered Palestine by 637. And after Amr had dealt with Palestine, he sought permission from Umar to conquer Egypt. So from Palestine, he entered Egypt through Sinai. And within 3 years, by the year 640, Egypt fell to the Muslims, and Amr ibn al-As was made the governor of Egypt by Umar. The Byzantine Empire didn't actually completely collapse, as had the Persian Empire. They simply retreated to the territories, from the territories that they had lost, and they actually survived as an empire for another 1,000 years until the 1400s. Until the 1400s, they actually remained an empire, although by that time, the empire was nothing more than Constantinople, which was conquered by the Ottomans under Mehmed II. And that conquest, the conquest of Constantinople, that marked the beginning of the end of the Byzantines. Okay, so there's quite a lot of other things that we can say about Umar's rule. I also wanted to talk about his administrative and financial feats. But let's leave that and carry on because we don't have time. So these are the governors that Umar appointed of the territories. We're going to come back to this when we in the next episode when we talk about the compilation of Uthman. So these were the governors appointed by Umar. And now, talking about the Quran, with all these territories that Umar has conquered, he now has a responsibility to teach all of these new people, these new converts, people who are coming into Islam in these territories. So he dispatches companions to teach these people. So he sends Abdullah ibn Mas'ud to Kufa in Iraq, and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud eventually becomes the ultimate authority of knowledge in Iraq. He sends Abu Musa Ash'ari and 9 other companions to Basra in Iraq. Kufa and Basra was actually founded under the instruction of Umar. Kufa was founded by Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. So after Hira was after they conquered Ctesiphon, just a couple of slides back, we mentioned that they conquered Ctesiphon by 637. After they had conquered Ctesiphon, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas made the palace of the Persian emperor his kind of base, his capital. But Omar said that he didn't want a capital so far away from Medina and separated by a river. So he instructed Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas to move to the other side of the river and found a city. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas founded Kufa in Iraq and made that his capital. Basra as well was founded by Abu Musa Ash'ari. So Abu Musa Ash'ari actually founded Basra, and Umar sent Abu Musa Ash'ari and 9 other companions to stay in Basra and teach the people. Mu'adh, Abu Darda, and Ubadah were sent to Hims in Syria. So the governor of Syria was Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan. He was the governor until 638, when he passed away. He passed away in the famous plague of Amwas, a famous plague that affected Syria and Iraq and Egypt. And that plague actually killed 20,000 companions, including Mu'adh, Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan, and many other companions. So when Yazid was the governor, he sent a message to Umar complaining that we need Quran teachers. We need people to teach the Quran in Syria. So Umar sent Mu'adh, Abu Darda, Ubadah, and he said to them, I want you to go to Hims in Syria and teach the people there. After you're done there, one of you should stay in Hims, and one of you should go to Damascus, and the other one should go to Palestine. So they did exactly as Umar said. They went to Hims in Syria. Ubadah decided to stay in Hims. Mu'adh continued on to Palestine, where he passed away and is now buried. And Abu Darda carried on to Damascus, and he settled in Damascus, and he became a renowned Quran authority in Damascus. His circle attracted hundreds of students across Syria. Imam Dhahabi mentions in his Siyar that his circles would attract up to 1,600 students. And what he would do to manage all of these new students is that he would split all the new students into groups of 10, and he would assign his own students to teach those. So he would assign his own students who had excelled in their knowledge to teach these new students, and he himself would make rounds supervising them. And only after these new students had passed the basic requirements, they would then come under Abu Darda's personal tutelage. And after reaching a certain level under him, Abu Darda would then make them teach new students. So in this way, he created a kind of efficient way to manage such a large number of students. Abu Musa did a very similar thing in Basra as well. So he would teach in the famous Basra mosque, the main mosque of Basra, and he would his gatherings would number up to 300, and he, just like Abu Darda, would split them into small groups and supervise them. Back in Medina, Umar, so in the peninsula, you still had people who were converting to Islam and needed Quran tuition. So Umar instructed Yazid ibn Abdullah ibn Qusayt to go out into the deserts and teach the Bedouins in Arabia. And he would then send Abu Sufyan to actually go out into the deserts and inspect, kind of get a feel for how much the tribes knew about the Quran. And back in Medina, Umar actually employed 3 companions in Medina to teach the Quran, and he would designate 15 dirhams per month as salary. So we come back to the original question: what was Umar's role in the Quran's dissemination? Well, we mentioned Umar's rule saw the expansion of Islam far beyond the borders of Arabia, and so you had so many people coming into Islam who required teaching of the Quran. So Umar responded by dispatching companions to teach the Quran, and they in turn set up schools, madrasas, and their own circles of Quran. And he also formalized the teaching of the Quran by actually introducing salaries. So he was the first person to actually introduce salaries for teaching the Quran. Unofficial handwritten copies would have continued to be produced and circulated across the empire, because remember, the script still hadn't been standardized. So people would have continued to scribe their own copies for themselves and others in their own script and following their own spelling conventions. And that wasn't a problem. That's not a problem at all, because as long as because the Quran was always meant to be an oral, it was taught orally, and the written compilations, that the written copies that people were scribing were their own personal copies. So that wasn't a problem, and Omar did not see the need to standardize the script. So while Abu Bakr's role was to compile the Quran, Umar is credited with actually spreading it by dispatching companions, by devising salaries for Quran teachers, and facilitating the setup of schools and madrasas and circles of Quran instruction. And Umar passes away on the 3rd of November, so 27th of the Hijjah approximately. He's stabbed by Abu Lu'lu. I'm sure most of us know how Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, was murdered. He was murdered by a slave called Abu Lu'lu, or his name was Firoz, and he happened to be the slave of Mughira ibn Shu'bah. Why did he stab Umar? The reason why was because the day before he stabbed him, he encountered Umar in the marketplace, and he complained about Mughira to Umar. He said, "My master Mughira has imposed a very heavy tax on me. So I have to pay him a certain amount each day, and I find it too burdensome." So Umar asked, "How much is he asking you to pay him?" So Abu Lu'lu said, 2 dirhams. So Umar said, "What do you work as?" He said, "I'm a carpenter, a painter, and an ironsmith." So Umar said, "These vocations are quite lucrative, so 2 dirhams a day doesn't sound like a lot." And when Umar saw that Abu Lu'lu wasn't happy with his answer, he said, to cheer him up, he said, "Listen, I heard you make very good windmills. Would you make one for me? And I'll pay you good money." And Abu Lu'lu said, "Okay, I'll make a windmill for you, one whose sound will be heard from the east to the west," an indirect threat to Umar. So the next morning during the Fajr prayer, Firoz came into the masjid with a poison dagger which he hid under his shirt. He went to the front row and stood in the front row, almost directly behind Umar. And as soon as Umar had started the salah, he went forward and stabbed Umar 6 times. And as Umar fell down, he managed to catch hold. He managed to hold Abdul Rahman ibn Auf and pull him forward to continue the salah. Firoz himself tried to escape by stabbing companions along the way towards the exit, but when he realized that he was on the verge of being apprehended, he committed suicide by stabbing himself with the same dagger. So after the salah, Umar is carried home, and on his way home he asks, "Who is my killer? Who murdered me? Who stabbed me?" Sorry. And they say it was Firoz. So Umar says, "Praise be to Allah who did not allow a Muslim to soil his hands with my blood." Okay, so he's taken home, and as he's lying on his deathbed, a doctor is called, a doctor from the Ansar, and the doctor tries giving him some milk for strength, but the milk immediately gushed from his wounds, and the doctor realized that he was on the verge of death, and so he said, "Amir al-Mu'mineen, choose your successor, because your final moments are close." So he sends his son Abdullah to go to al-Mu'mineen Aisha, and he says to Abdullah, "Go to al-Mu'mineen Aisha, give her my salam, and inform her that I request to be buried next to my 2 noble companions, i.e. the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Bakr." So Abdullah goes, informs Aisha, and Aisha begins to cry when she hears that Umar is on his deathbed, and she gives permission. So Abdullah ibn Umar comes back and informs Umar that Aisha has given permission. Umar then sends for Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, Zubair, Talha, Ali, and Uthman. He calls them to advise them on how to appoint a successor. So someone told him that Talha is out of Medina. So Umar said to these 5 companions, he said to them, "Wait for Talha for 3 days. If he doesn't come, then you choose amongst yourselves the Khalifa. And whoever gets the majority is the Khalifa. If after Talha comes, there's of course 6 of them now. So if the views are equal on both sides, then Abdullah, i.e. Umar's son, should be made the judge. But Umar said, he does not have the right to be the Khalifa. He can only be the judge if there's equal votes on both sides. And saying this, he asked his son Abdullah to place his forehead on the ground in sajda, and in this state he passed away 3 days after he was wounded. He passed away at night on the 27th of the Hijjah, corresponding approximately to the 3rd of November. And the following morning, his janazah was led by Suhaib, and he was lowered into his grave by Ali, Zubair, Uthman, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, and his son Abdullah. And as he's now passed away, the suhuf of Abu Bakr, they pass into the care of his daughter, al-Mu'mineen Hafsa, may Allah be pleased with her, the widow of Rasulullah. It passes into her custody because the third Khalifa hasn't still yet been chosen. So unlike when Umar became the Khalifa, he became the Khalifa upon the appointment of Abu Bakr. So that's why the Suhuf passed directly into his care. However, when Umar passed away, he left the decision to these 6 companions. Therefore, as soon as he passed away, the Suhuf, which were very important, were taken out of the state archives and given to Hafsa to be kept in her custody. And that is the end of our second episode. I know it's been quite long. Jazakumullahu khairan for being patient and listening. And inshallah, in our third episode, we'll talk about the compilation of Uthman. And before we actually do that, we'll also talk about the concept of the al-qira'at, or the concept of al-ahruf al-sab'a, the 7 ahruf, before we actually talk about the compilation of Uthman. Jazakumullahu khairan. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.